Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our Concepts Edition, episode 149. I am Devin Bedoni of Lichen Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arda. And today's quote, "Play is the highest form of research," from Albert Einstein.
Yes.
I needed this one.
We all need to quit work today. Go play.
Well, no, it's funny. The buckles all came out of like me bike packing. Like it wasn't a rational.
Right.
I mean, clearly it wasn't a rational thing. If we've talked about this before, if you're trying to pursue money, I feel like, which I guess you could rationalize it through other things, not just money. But
Right, yeah. Right.
But yeah, I was just saying that I am feeling a little bit like low on ideas in a funny way. And I think part of that is because I just haven't had time to just be like goofing around and pursuing stuff purely because I'm curious about it or I find it enjoyable. And yeah, it was nice to see a quote from such a smart fellow as Einstein.
Notoriously smart.
Yeah, that said, his career was sort of getting paid to just daydream or something.
Well, yeah, I guess. I don't know enough about his career. It seems like he did some like legitimate math as well. But
I mean, yeah, people do appreciate his math.
yeah. But I think it's good also, even without the context of like product design or, inspiring new things. I think it's important to also just remember that people don't, like, productivity is not a linear thing for humans, and maintaining excitement in life and a sense of inspiration and playfulness really does affect the ability of people to get work done and be like good members of a team.
Yeah.
And so I think just on a personal note, it's pretty critical to have that. And I notice when we manage to have a playful atmosphere in my shop, things do seem to just kind of go smoother.
Yeah, I know like the reason I started making buckles was definitely less related to process improvement and more related to making cool shit out of metal. I mean, not out of metal specifically, but it is pretty cool to program a CNC and then have the product you just prototyped in your hand in like such a finished form. And it's easy to lose sight of that. But then this week, a follower, I think I mentioned, reached out with a cool design for a buckle. And so I got in some prototyping time, and that was really fun. And yeah, just kind of getting back to having fun instead of trying to figure out exactly where I should optimize my time. But not enough of it. Could use some more. I read the Idea Factory years ago about Bell Labs when they had a monopoly and just like endless cash essentially, and they just had so many very smart people paid to play essentially. And like a lot of computational theory came from a guy who was trying to get a mechatronic mouse to solve a maze, and this was all with vacuum tubes, right? But it was like laid the groundwork for some of the early
vacuum tube logic.
No, not vacuum tube logic, but actually just the math behind like computer science, basically. Like how to think about processing speed and cycles.
But he was using vacuum tubes to create the logic. Yeah.
Yes, he was. Anyway.
Interesting. Wild. Well, kids are good for that too, because
well,
they play.
Great timing.
And if you want to hang out with them, that usually means playing too.
Well, that'll be good.
Or being grumpy.
Right.
Both happen, I can say.
Yeah. So I have let's see, a few things here. One of the more interesting things I've come across, or realizations I kind of had, is reading this book, Factory Physics.
Hmm.
The section I'm on is about sort of the history of manufacturing.
Uh-huh.
Very brief, very overview kind of esque, but we've had a very fun opportunity with Arda to just get in a lot of small manufacturers and kind of see what their struggles are, right? And reading this book, it really, something that jumped out to me was that the second industrial revolution, the first was sort of the steam engine, and then
Right.
that affected a lot of things. But the second was this whole concept of interchangeable parts around precision, making standardized components was just a huge change in how the world made products, and it took like 100 years. I mean, we're still doing it, but
Sure. Yeah.
and a big part of that is every part is the same enough that you can combine it with any other part and it works. And I remember in Freedom's Forge, there was a bit where Knudsen went onto the shop floor and took all the files when he moved over to GM,
Oh, right. Yeah.
because it was like, no, you guys can't just file it till it fits. You have to tell us that we're making parts that don't fit so we can fix that. And that was a big part of nailing mass manufacturing. And that was when he did that. That was already 100 years later. And what I've noticed with small companies is it feels like a lot of companies go through the second industrial revolution
Yeah.
in a
Over and
funny
over
way
and over
where,
again. Yeah.
yeah, and we've talked about this. I think the more obvious place to look for this is in the physical world, where people who are building whatever it is, welded assemblies. We see it a lot in like custom vehicle making, where smaller companies really treat everything as this sort of bespoke one-off. Like I remember watching a guy modify a cabinet they make to put a port for a flue coming out of it, right? But we're all familiar with buying a product that has a little cap over where a switch goes, that like you didn't buy the version that has that switch,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Totally.
And then later it's like, oh no, every part needs to kind of just fit with all the other parts, and there's just massive advantages to that.
Yeah.
And then the second is definitely the information side,
It's
right? Like
huge there.
standardized, complete information that gets passed. Anyway, it just kind of popped out at me.
Yeah. No, I think we struggle with that constantly. And yeah, silly little things. Invoicing, right? Feels unique and different every single time.
Right.
It's not. But you still somehow it it can feel hard to like get over the hurdle of automating it for silly reasons. That's just one that happens to have happened recently because like we had a automated solution, we switched platforms, we haven't rebuilt it, and it's like, yeah, I will do this, but you know every Friday rolls around when I'm gonna do invoicing, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm not doing that today. I'll just cut this flue hole uniquely 10 different times.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We have it with our wholesale accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because every flue pipe wants to be a special little flower.
Yeah.
In our case, like, no, most of them are great. And we updated our wholesaling side so that we just send people wholesale codes and they can place orders through the website. But there's a few who just insist on sending a PO.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm like, hey, can you at least look at the website, because we don't offer those products anymore. And then you could just place the order on our website. And they're like, no, here's another PO. Like, okay, I will enter it on the website and then maybe make like human error,
Yeah.
enter a quantity
Interesting.
wrong, whatever. So,
The meshing of different organizational systems is always interesting. Like we deal with this with some of our bigger customers that have big internal procurement purchasing systems
Hmm.
and billing systems, and like you have to engage with their system on their terms,
Right.
and it forces you to jump through all these hoops. It's definitely like, I'm sure, beneficial. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. Some of them seem like, oh my God, how do you guys use this software? But on the interior side, there must be some benefit for them to be using them. But it definitely puts a lot of, it offloads a bunch of work and headache onto their vendors.
Yeah, I have that as a customer. The anodizer we use
Yeah.
sometimes, they just made a switch where they want a PO per process. So it's like, okay, so instead of they're like, it saves us a lot of work. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it does. And it creates that work for me.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I get it. I too would like to do this. Here, you do the work.
Right.
No, I get it. But I think, yeah, something that's interesting that stands out in all the books on Toyota is how closely they work with their vendors and are
Yeah.
cognizant at every single stage of who their customer is, whether that's internal or external.
Yeah.
And like pushing work onto your customer or your vendor is not a good answer.
It's not. Yeah.
But for those of us who are not Toyota, we can't. People don't necessarily spend a ton of time working with us to understand our needs.
True.
So,
Same. Yeah.
yep. Yeah. So here's one that similarly, just reading some stuff. It occurred to me that this is, well, sort of loosely related to Freedom's Forge. There is in World War One, the U.S. Basically had a production czar whose job was to coordinate the production of war material for for U.S. troops, and the U.S.
World
ended
War
up
One, you
deploying
said?
World War One. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for U.S. troops, about 90% of U.S. troops apparently deployed with European-made equipment for two reasons. One is the U.S. completely failed to hit the mark on what needed to be made and when and getting it made.
Yeah.
Second was no one made enough ships to get it over to Europe. And so in World War II, a very different approach was pursued rather than sort of this central office trying to figure out what was needed, figure out who all could make it, and then sort of pushing that plan out there. They basically they just put out RFQs, right? And then people in industry could have a look, go, yeah, we're going to make those, and then subcontract a lot of the components out, do whatever it took to get them made to
Yeah.
spec on time, or not on time, as the case may be. But it was way more successful, and the industrial effort in World War II was, I mean, some attribute the victory to the ability to outproduce our enemies in that war. But I think if you asked anyone to coordinate a country's production, it is at least a very daunting task.
At least, yes.
But if you ask people to just say what they need and when, and then let the providers sort of say, hey, yeah, we can do that, and here's kind of the price. It just, like, the corollary to ERPs versus pull, like command and control versus pull, is sort
Yeah.
of apparent. And I think there's a temptation as a system gets small, there's a temptation to treat it, using command and control. And it fails at a small scale, and it fails at a big scale. It's interesting that people still pursue it.
Yeah.
But similarly, like the Soviet Union compared to free market, for the first, I'm going to get the dates wrong a little bit, but for the first while of the Soviet Union, their productivity was actually higher than the U.S. And there was an interesting paper. Someone sent it to me. I haven't read it yet, but apparently they kind of just lay out that as products around the 50s that switched. So as products got more and more complex and supply chains got more and more complex, that system just couldn't keep up with the
Huh.
complexity, which kind of gets back to, similar concept.
Yeah. Interesting. That is very interesting.
But maybe that's a counterpoint to what I just said, where when it's simple enough, at a small enough scale, maybe it is better.
Or I don't know about better, but maybe like at least achieves parity, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to say that I don't think it's the way, but there is an argument that well, I guess like I'm trying to think of examples. I mean, obviously, command and control. Is it really though? Yeah, I mean, there's like in the military, obviously, chain of command style, but that is actually still sort of pull, where a central figure, quote unquote, like pushes out a command, but that's really a request, and then it flows through a chain of requests that is a chain of command, right? Like there's not necessarily one person architecting it all. There
Well,
is, but it's like an overall strategy, not necessarily like actually saying like Joe the infantryman is going to move.
shoot 3 times at this point, aiming
Yes.
north-northeast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They're saying like, we have an initiative where we need to do this, and then that flows through the organization as a series of requests effectively for
Yeah,
an
and I think
outcome.
I'm not the most read military historian by any means, but it does seem like the breakdown tends to be similar when you lose a feedback loop from what's happening on the front line
Yeah.
to affecting that strategy. Those don't tend to go well, and that can be due to bad culture, where
Yeah.
people are not meant to kind of speak truth to power or something. Be
Right.
like, this
Yeah.
actually isn't happening, or like people trying to save face, saying they beat their enemy when they didn't,
Yeah.
or that does not go well. Whereas if you do have good communication of, here's what we're seeing, here's what's changing,
Yeah.
let's update the plan, and a lot of pull is just being responsive. I mean, at the end of the day, and the more responsive and the higher the resolution that response can happen in terms of time, the tighter you can get to not misallocating money and time, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are we going with that though? Oh, like how can command and control work in small systems? I think it can be effective, but I don't think it's superior in small organizations or simple systems.
Yeah. Trying to think of a good. I mean, when you have perfect information and nothing can change like chess is like command and control works great. Right. But then
Right.
it's also a
Yeah.
2-person game. So I feel like that's a dumb example because it's like one person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, moment of silence for no.
I guess
Command and control is dead.
if people have interesting examples of where command and control systems are actually superior, it'd be interesting to hear back.
Yeah. That said, my feeling is that the feedback loop is what's missing for a lot of control systems, right? Command and control. If you start to incorporate, like, I think that, and we've talked about this before, but what's it called? Industry 4.0, right? That's like,
Yeah.
hey, let's put sensors on everything so that they're updating you with their current state so that you can update your plan and have real time information to change the plan. Yeah, that said, I think one thing that it will continue to struggle with, even with perfect information, and even if you don't look at the cost of getting data, is the fact that we were sort of talking about this the other day, maybe not on the podcast, but whether you're building a system or building a plan, right? And you actually should put more time into building the system
Yeah.
and the rules that can execute on any set of variables. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
That,
but
yeah, right. Versus just building a moment by moment schedule, as it
yeah,
were,
like
or a
doing a
plan.
great
Yeah.
job or not a great job, as the case may be.
Right. Yeah. Curious.
Yeah, so that's that. Um, this is a funny one. I forget if we talked about this on the pod already, but if so, I had the realization a second time. Just going through my calendar again and seeing that the things that I deemed important were not on my calendar. And
Interesting.
so the way I was spending my time, and probably still am to a large degree.
The things you deemed personally important, or like what you were actually spending your time at, like at work.
Like if you just sat down and made a list of here's the most for work, here's the most
Yeah.
impactful stuff I can do.
Yeah.
And then you say here's the second most impactful type of activity. And
Sure.
then you go through your calendar or just sort of audit your day.
Uh huh.
Those theoretically should probably line up to some degree. And for my personal
Yeah.
life too.
Yeah, I suppose. I think the way calendars or the use of calendars often evolve is you put the things on there that are hard to remember because they are not front and center in your mind, because they are not your obvious priorities. Or at least that's how I've always used it, is like, I know that I'm going to come to work and I'm going to program parts. Like, I don't put that on my calendar because I don't need a reminder. If you are using a
Right.
calendar as like a complete plan solution, I can see how that would be. Like,
Yeah,
if
it's
you're filling it
the
up with
perfect
other
command and
stuff.
control for your day. Well, yeah, mine is filling up, and it's more stuff where people need to kind of synchronize and show up at a specific time. I think, but if I don't, so I have a lot of Calendly links out, and if I don't book time for other activities, people book time
That
in
has a
their
real
stead.
consequence then. Yeah.
Yeah, and so not blocking out time for the things that I am saying are really important to get done, and then my day fills up with other stuff.
Yeah. Because it's not
Yeah.
just your calendar at that point. It's a lot of people's calendar.
Yeah, I suppose.
Maybe that's the distinguishing
But also
factor.
for like my personal life too. Like time set aside for things that I want to spend time on.
Yeah.
And then life happens.
It sure do.
Yeah. So, last thing I have in here is, this is just kind of a personal win. You know, we talk a lot about, I guess, you know, we shill for Toyota, you know, once a week on this podcast.
Hard.
No, but just like reading the effects of pull production of the Toyota production system of continuous improvement.
Yeah. I
It's
have to say, actually,
amazing.
we don't shill
Yeah,
as hard as many other folks shill. So I feel
that's
pretty good about that.
yeah. And I think anyway, so we had a phone call with an early Arda customer, and we have just a banger quote from them, but basically they increased their throughput by 600%, and in doing that also reduced their inventory by 80%, which obviously huge. I mean, I don't know. It just was
Those are
like
big numbers. Yeah.
big numbers. I was having a hard day, and that was a big pick me up.
That's
But
over like a year, roughly.
yeah, I think coming up on a year. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
probably just about a year now. So
And is there, I mean, obviously, those are big, impressive numbers regardless. And presumably, like, the financial side is tracking in a positive direction along
so
with that.
they doubled their revenue, and this past year, and they anticipate doubling it again this next year.
Wow.
So, you know, obviously margins are a question mark there with
Sure.
600 increase in, but I think, you know, as we all know, running businesses, yeah, there's some delay on some of those things. And like, I
Sure.
think a big part of that for them was moving into some dealerships and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
higher volume, lower margin.
Sure.
But yeah,
But able to do that, which is a big
yeah,
deal.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like this book, there's a anecdote. This is Shigeo Shingo,
The
the
Shingo
Shingo
production.
Production Management System, and in it talks about a truck company. I mean, many examples, but a truck company that reduced lead times from 2 weeks to 2 hours or something like that, and freed up 40% of their floor space and
Yeah.
reduced their labor costs by 60%. And you're like, wow, that's crazy. How is that possible? And I don't know. So it's just very cool to see it happen. One of the fun things about a lot of Arda customers is they don't really know that they're using Kanban. They don't know that they're using pull or any other method, which I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not trying to like take credit for coming up with Kanban. It's more that like if you need to get people to buy into the theory, it's
It's
like
more complicated.
it's more complicated. Many fewer people are going to do it. I am constantly shocked by how many people we talk to who have had a career in manufacturing and have never heard about the Toyota production system.
Huh.
It is wild to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is funny. Like, until I read the Toyota Way, I hadn't either. I'd heard of lean for years.
But only in
And
passing. And it's
yeah,
always, right? I mean, for me anyway.
I mean, I'd heard about it more than in passing, but
Okay.
not always in positive terms. And like vaguely knew that Toyota was involved, but like I didn't know that TPS was a thing. So I think
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's not widely discussed here in the States
It's
as an
bizarre because
independent thing.
like the jury is in. It's like, it's so much better.
Yeah.
Like you look at earnings of companies who do it. You look at companies who have, who are just like the best at production in their arena. And
Yeah.
that can be producing code or that can be producing vehicles or food.
Right.
Like the throughput goes way up. Like there's that unblocking the log jam or whatever that, right? That was about,
Oh, yeah. The medical testing,
yeah,
DNA.
sequencing lab, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just odd, but yeah, those results I would say can be largely or mostly attributed. They're not unusual results for switching to pull, but
Yeah.
making that, I don't know, just being involved with that is super cool, and seeing it
I
in real life is like kind
yeah.
of awesome.
Yeah, totally. I'd be kind of curious to see, like, to what do I've gotten the impression that basically the auto industry as a whole has more or less switched over to
Yeah,
pull style manufacturing.
yeah,
I get the impression that like some companies do it better than others, obviously. I'm kind of curious. I wonder if there's any information out there of like sort of auditing, kind of the different companies, like how fully they have bought in to what, to what degree, what they're good at, what they're not good at, all of that kind of stuff across the industry.
that's a really interesting question. Yeah, we had an interesting failure mode here where we dropped a lot of extra Kanbans into the system because we realized our inventories were insufficient for the lead times we were dealing with now that we've switched to anodize.
Yeah.
And it totally blew up the system because suddenly we had 2 weeks of Kanbans sitting in the queue. And so suddenly the system is not responsive to demand for the next 2 weeks. And
Uh-huh.
so,
To immediate demand, to
yeah,
like,
to like
yeah.
immediate consumption and stocking out of different SKUs.
Yeah.
And so the mix you end up producing is sort of largely theoretical and not in
Yeah.
line with what's actually being consumed. And so you can stock out. And it's really annoying. But the intuitive response was to kind of lay out a schedule of when we're going to do what. And then it's like, no, that we've read enough books to know that that's not the answer. But that was like the immediate thought is like, okay, well, let's just figure out what we want to do when and we'll do it. It's like,
Uh-huh.
no, no, no. We have to think deeply about this to figure out a way to respond to demand while also introducing large influxes in cards. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's very, very difficult to stay true to the ideas in TPS.
Yeah. For sure.
And so I bet there's a wide variety of success for adhering to it, but also like how far down it propagates, right? Like
Yeah.
is it really what people are using on the shop floor? Are people actually pulling an end-on cord? Are there people
Sure.
coming around to support those activities and make improvements that cut across departments? And like, there's,
Yeah, that's the question
yeah,
I'm curious about.
yeah,
Right.
that's a super interesting question.
But also in the sort of putting it back into terms of like not tricking your customers into using pull, but like introducing a system that achieves that without them being bought into the theory. I think maybe that's where a lot of industries are at right
Mm,
now, is like they're doing pieces of this without having like, you know, deciding to eat the whole elephant, as it were. They're just like,
I,
and I wonder
yeah.
how long term broadly affect. I mean, obviously it is fairly broadly effective because, excuse me, because the auto industry is still extremely competitive, and it's not like one company is absolutely crushing,
I mean, if you
right?
look at the
Like,
profits, it's sort of not true, but
it's sort of, sort of not, but like Toyota doesn't have all of the market, right?
no.
There's still a lot of competition.
Yeah. And like
So
Honda is famously quite lean.
yeah, yeah,
Nissan, but they might merge.
they were bought by Honda,
Yeah.
I believe.
Um, yeah. I I guess from so this is not definitive by any means, and if anyone knows any resources where people do look at this question, I would
Yeah,
love to read that. But we've talked to a lot of folks now doing Arda, and I think that ERPs are sort of a tempting mistress, and that people end up falling back into that paradigm, even if they're trying to operate like, I don't know, like SAP has a Kanban module,
uh huh,
but you are still deeply in the context of a command and control system, and that
yeah,
it's very, very difficult organizationally to move away from that because of cost accounting, as an example.
yeah, yeah,
Like, there's just a lot of things that need to happen for that to happen. The other is that, like, Bosch is sort of famous for being good at pull. So,
huh.
and then, like, what was that? Not Umi. What's that plant in the U.S. that was like that joint
Numi,
venture? What?
Numi.
Numi. Right, right. That did not succeed. Well, I don't
I
know what
think it,
succeed means.
I think it
Didn't
did for
Maybe
quite
I'm
a while.
totally wrong.
I think at some point Toyota, what I had read was they were kind of like, this experiment has worked, and
Mm.
then
And then
they
they
started building their own plants in the U.S. That was
gotcha.
sort of like their test case
Gotcha.
for.
So it did succeed
I think it did succeed. I think the plant was eventually shut down or sold or something like that,
for
and
other reasons.
yeah, for other reasons. But I don't think it
Gotcha.
was a failure. I think it was quite successful.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, it is definitely more prevalent in the automotive industry, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I just talked to someone in the defense industry yesterday.
Uh huh.
I was like, I
Like a
mean, I'm sure it
contractor.
exists, but he had never heard of it. And he spent a career at a big military manufacturer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It
I,
is
I
wild.
I wonder if
Should
there
cover it in
is.
school.
What's that?
They should cover it in school.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is wild. This is a different thought than what I was about to have, but it is crazy how much in general industry, how much lean and Six Sigma is just like a bad word.
Mm, yeah.
It's pretty intense because
I,
it is so misunderstood and often, which is hilarious. It is often applied in a and control
yeah.
format and just totally falls on its face.
I mean, that's
The other,
part of the reason we don't mention it is because a lot of people on the shop floor are like, "Oh, great, awesome, yeah,
yeah,
fun. Let's
these
do this
guys
again."
again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to kind of come up with a sort of like a. I mean, I think they're there, but I haven't thought through what they are. A few sort of like North Stars to like hold on
Mm,
to keep from falling back down, the rabbit hole into command and control style systems, just like you were talking about with your Kanban scheduling when you dropped all those cards, right? It's like
right.
it's so knee jerk to fall back into a
Yeah.
planning mode.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts right off the bat of like what is a North Star to hold to. I mean, it seems like responding to demand obviously is one, but
Uh, yeah, I think,
as soon as you have any insulation from that, it's really easy to still like think you're responding to demand and planning like you
I
guys
mean,
were.
I think that the big failure that gives it a bad name is people coming onto the shop floor and throwing away everyone's tools because they're like, oh, you only
Oh
need
yeah.
this Allen key and this wrench, and that's all you need, and the rest is waste. So you're welcome.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
absolutely. That was sort of a separate thought, but I
uh-huh.
just think in terms of like for people who are bought in as well, but
Yeah.
like trying to keep an eye out for where we lose sight of the vision or the underlying goals, like some simple North Stars to sort of like check in, like touch base, be like, am I doing this thing? Yeah, I think I'm still doing this thing. Or like, am I doing this
Yeah.
thing? No, actually, this is a totally different system we're working in all of a sudden without even sort of realizing it.
Um, I think one that comes to mind is, like, I don't know how to say this one exactly. It's sort of like, is your solution scaled with the problem?
Mm,
And I think the A3 sort of handles a lot of these failure modes, honestly, because,
yeah,
for example, it is always tempting when you can say, hey, if we just had some more data, like think about this. If we knew when people were available, we knew when our machines were available, we knew what could go on which machine, theoretically, we could get this perfect schedule.
yeah,
And it's like, well, that's pretty tempting. And so then you try it, and then you go, oh, well, it's falling apart for this reason. Oh, we didn't put lunch in there. Okay, let's add lunch. Oh, we didn't put allowances for like tool breakage, unexpected tool breakage. Okay, well, let's maybe is that like 7%? Is that 2%? Like, what is that? Okay, we'll add that in. And then you start, it's like, you sort of lost sight of the fact that this whole thing was meant to sort of save time.
yeah,
And this is another one. We hear from investors a lot, like talking, pitching different people. And they're like, why are you still using paper cards, right, with Arda?
yeah,
Like, couldn't you use like computer vision? Couldn't you use. And it's like, okay, just on a. Yes, like we're not against it. Like, gathering data is gathering data. I don't care how we get it.
yeah,
But a piece of paper is quite inexpensive. Right? Like, it's just cheap. I don't know. Like, that's a
yeah,
good reason. Like, it's
yeah,
simple, it works. Why do we need something different?
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think a couple North Stars I keep coming back to, just following my own sort of, interrogation here is, are we problem solving based on establishing current state? Right. Like, are we
Yep.
actually coming to terms with where we're at? Which is maybe it's just like, yeah, are
Depressing.
you are you living in the future? Or are you living in the present? Sort of a little bit. Eh,
I like that way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other is just like which direction the information, which direction do you look for information when you're producing?
Mm,
Are you looking upstream or are you looking downstream?
that's a great one.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Good place to wrap up.
It is. It's about to get loud in here.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks all for listening. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com, arda.cards on Instagram and on the internet.
You can find me at lichen_MFG on Instagram, likenprecision.com on the internet, the pod at incremental CI, and we have a Patreon.
Check it
Remember to
out.
hit it up. We will talk to you soon.